Hello, welcome to Costume Construction 1. I thought it might be easier just to make a video rather than a whole bunch of emails. This is the pattern envelope for the pajama pants that you should be getting by next Monday. And this is the pattern, and you see how complicated it is? It's like all these pages and different things to cut. So what I wanted to do was to make the miniature version first in order that you can understand what the shapes are. Because when you make the pattern piece, when you do the life-size pattern, you're going to be crawling around on the floor, cutting things out. So I've emailed you a JPEG of the pattern pieces. So it's called Costume Construction 1 Miniature Patterns. So you can open that on your laptop and on your computer. And then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to increase the size until your pants pattern measures 5 inches. You see, here's the pants pattern. It's not 5 inches yet. Let me see if that's 5 inches. It's 4.5, so let me enlarge it a bit more. And now it is 5 inches. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to trace the shapes on some paper. And I'll correct the straight lines later. Make sure that you get these notches too, because they're going to help you in your construction. Okay, so these are the pattern pieces for the pajama pants that you can trace off your screen. So I've traced out my pattern, and now I'm going to cut out, and I've made sure to include the notches, and I'm now going to cut these pieces out. So I have my two pieces here, and if you want, you can trace all this information from the JPEG on here. Where the two notches are, that's the back. Pants, back, and the other one is pants, front. So here we have it. So now we're going to draw this out on muslin. So I have my muslin piece right here, and I'm going to be laying out my pants back and pants front pattern on the muslin. And I'm going to space them a little bit so I have some room for seam allowance. So one side is going to be this side, and then the other side you got to flip it to the mirror image. Otherwise you're going to have two right legs or two left legs. So make sure to flip it when you draw it. So I've drawn out the pattern pieces onto the muslin, and I've left some space in between. Make sure when you mark those notches that you mark it into the pattern piece, and not just in the seam allowance, so that you can see all the notches. So now we have to add our seam allowances to the pattern pieces. And if you look at the JPEG that I sent to you, it says 1/4 inch seam allowances around all parts of the pajama pants except for the waist, where you're going to be adding 5/8 of a seam allowance. So let's do the waist first. I'm going to mark off 5/8 of an inch. Here's a half, 5/8. Here's a half, 5/8. So this line is going to be, this seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch, front and back, and front and back. And then everything else is just 1/4 of an inch. So here's 1/4 of an inch, here's 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm just going to draw this line 1/4 inch away from my stitching line on all sides except for the waistband, which we've already marked at 5/8 of an inch. So here's one piece. and I'm going to mark that on all of my 4 pieces. So I've drawn out all of my seam allowances on all 4 pieces, and now I'm going to cut all the pieces out. Here's one piece. I just have 3 more left to do. So the first step is to sew the side seams together on the left leg and the side seam on the right leg. So the 2 notches that you have here, you can line those up, and then you're also going to be lining up the top of the pants and the bottom of the pants on the side seam. So you're going to be single thread with a knot at the end, and you're going to sew right along the side seam, and you just want to make sure that you have your lines matched up on both sides. If you want to use pins, if you have pins, you're welcome to, and you want to, but you can also just kind of position it like this if you've cut your seam allowances properly. And you're going to want to have a nice tiny stitch, because it's a tiny pair of pants and we want a tiny stitch. So I'm looking at like 1/4 inch stitches. And please refer to the JPEGs I sent separately as a reminder to the stitches. So I'm going to sew up this pant leg side seam, and then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I have my 2 side seams stitched by hand. See here, I hope. See, my lighting is good. Anyway, so if you have an iron at home, you can press the seam open. You remember in class how to press a seam open, right? But if you don't have an iron, you can just finger press it open, because muslin is almost like paper, so you can just kind of smush it down and rub your fingers across that seam, and you can kind of get it to lay somewhat flat. Not everybody has an iron in this day and age. 100 years ago, everybody would have had an iron. Okay, so I have my 2 legs. I have the left leg and I have the right leg. So the double notch, that's going to be the back of your pants, and the non-notch is going to be your front. So your next step is you're going to sew your 2 fronts together. So it's going to be this curved line. You're sewing that together. So I've stitched the front together like so, and remember what we learned about curved seams? It's good to clip into it in order to loosen that tension. So right where this curve is, I'm going to clip maybe 2 or 3 times. 2, 3. So I've clipped in here, and now I'm going to finger press this open again. So here we have the front and the sides, and then it's open in the back. So the next step that we're going to do is we are going to create a casing to put the waistband through. Remember, we practiced that also. So you're going to fold this on your pencil line, but then you have to tuck it under once more. So you have like an 1/8 of an inch undertuck, and then 3/8 of an inch for your channel. So that's the waistband, and then also we're going to hem the pants. So here you have a 1/4 of an inch hem allowance, and so you're just going to fold that up at a 1/4 inch, and you're just going to sew across this hem. You don't have to do this, flip it twice. So remember, when stitching a casing, to put twill tape through, you have to stitch it, make the stitches very close to the edge. That way you have enough room to thread the safety pin through. Remember, so we have a safety pin here, and we're going to be threading that through. So you have to make sure that your casing is big enough to accommodate that safety pin. And then as for the hem, you can just kind of fold it over and stitch it right in the middle. And now we're going to sew the back up. So the back is where the 2 notches were, and we're going to sew from here to here. But we're not going to sew up top here because we want to keep that open in order to thread the tape through. So I'm going to start sewing right where the thread ends, here, and I'm going to sew all the way around that way. So I've stitched this line, and again, don't forget you have to put a knot at your thread, and then you have to make a knot at the end of your stitching. So again, this is a curve, so I'm going to snip into here maybe two or three times, making sure not to cut the threads. And this way it opens up. So our last seam is going to be sewing the inseam shut. From here to here. From here to here. One tricky part about sewing in the inseam is that you got to get the crotch seam, this part, nice and flat. You got to press that seam allowance open here, and then you have to do that on the other side also. And then once that's pressed up and nice and flat, you have to line those two up. So what I usually do is I start sewing the inseam starting right here where the front and the back end get together, and then I sew it in this direction, and then I flip it around and I sew it in the other direction, because this way I can hold it tight with my fingers while I start sewing. So I have the pants finished stitching, and now I just have to turn them right side out. So remember when you had your gingerbread man, how you had to turn it right side out? This is similar, so there's a little bit of finagling to do. And you could take either a pencil, or you can take a Sharpie, or the points of your scissors if you're really willing to risk poking a hole in. So you're going to turn both legs right side out. And here we have the pants. So the last step now is to thread the drawstring through. And so you should have gotten a piece of this cord in your little care package I sent you. Let me know if you don't have it, and we can come up with something else. So I'm threading this through, and of course now it's going to be hard. I have to get it through the side seam, so this might take you some time of poking. So I'm going to thread it all the way through. So I've threaded this all the way through, and I'm going to leave myself a nice little edge like this, because I don't want to lose the threading. I'll trim this off, and I guess in hindsight it would have been better to put the tie in the front, but there you have it. So we have the pants. We'll put it on little Miss Lady here. And tie up the back. And here you have your pajama pants. So next week you're going to be doing this life size, and that's going to take a lot longer because you're going to have to do better stitching on this. You have to do a back stitch, and you're going to have to use double thread, and it's a lot bigger. So this is just a quick process on how to make it. And for those of you interested in the extra credit kimono top, this is what it looks like finished. And email me if you have any additional questions on that. But that should be kind of your second process.